The Biden administration is set to restore federal funding to Planned Parenthood, and is climate change taking priority over human rights at the State Department? New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith is here to react. And a major pharmaceutical company's COVID vaccine is being suspended from distribution in the U.S. after some disturbing side effects. Infectious disease specialist Dr. Stephen Smith is here with analysis. He spent 23 years as a prison chaplain at San Quentin. Pastor and author of Death Row Chaplain, Reverend EARL SMITH, is here to share his story of redemption and hope. And finally, what are the factors that destroy a civilization or preserve it? Boston College philosophy professor Dr. Peter KREEFT provides some answers in his new book, The World Over. Begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Congressman Chris Smith, Dr. Stephen Smith, Reverend EARL SMITH, and Dr. Peter KREEFT are all straight ahead. I'm afraid we don't have a fourth Smith, but we'll work on it. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send us a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. First, some news. At his Wednesday audience at the Vatican this week, Pope Francis addressed the subject of community and prayer. He said that communities within the church tend to flourish when prayer is central. He contrasted the power of prayer with what he sees as the strategy of Satan against the church, saying, quote, "For example, we see it in certain groups that want to carry out ecclesial reforms, to make changes in the life of the church. There is the media that inform everyone, but prayer is not seen. They do not pray." He added, it is, quote, "the enemy inducing her to make those proposed changes." He went on to claim that changes in the church without prayer are not changes made by the church, they are changes made by groups. And the Vatican announced its 5th annual International Health Conference to be held in May, titled Exploring the Mind, Body, and Soul, How Innovation and Novel Delivery Systems Improve Human Health. It aims to bring together the world's top scientists, ethicists, faith leaders, and others to discuss the latest developments in medicine, healthcare, and technology. Among the speakers at this year's event, Chelsea Clinton of the Clinton Foundation, New Age guru Deepak Chopra, Doctors Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci of the NIH, and Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Joe Perry of the band Aerosmith. You'll remember in 2018, pop star Katy Perry joined the proceedings to speak on the subject of transcendental meditation. We'll be sure to keep you posted on this story as it develops. President Joe Biden is moving to reverse a Trump-era policy that barred federal Title X funding to groups that perform and refer for abortions, notably Planned Parenthood. Here to discuss is New Jersey Congressman, co-chair of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus, Congressman Chris Smith. Congressman, thanks for being here. The 2019 Protect Life rule mandated that Title X fund recipients be both physically and financially separate from facilities that perform abortions. As a result, Planned Parenthood exited the Title X program to continue performing abortions. What does the Biden reversal of this policy mean? And will federal dollars go either directly or indirectly to pay for abortions?
Without a doubt, the Planned Parenthood and all the other abortion mills in this country were told by the Trump administration you could no longer co-locate your family planning Title X money, and it's a huge amount of money, with abortion. And Biden right now is, he announced it earlier, but now he's doing it, will be ending the ban on co-location so that our money will be interspersed with their money to expand abortion throughout this country. It is, this policy goes back to George Herbert Walker Bush. That's how long ago. And unfortunately, Clinton reversed it when he came into office. And now we have Biden reversing it as well. And just for the record, this is $340 million and an increase of about 18%, according to the budget just sent up to the Hill by the Biden administration, to facilitate the promotion of abortion. It's outrageous. It underscores that Joe Biden is the abortion president. Everything he is doing, domestically and internationally, is being integrated with abortion. And of course, he's looking to end the Hyde Amendment and all the other important protections we have in law.
Right, and I want to get to that in a moment. Planned Parenthood CEO and President Alexis McGill Johnson applauded the Biden administration, and then she went on to frame access to health care in terms of race. And listen to this. She said, due to centuries of systemic racism and injustice, the rule has disproportionately, Title X, harmed people of color and people with low incomes, all at a time when access to affordable preventive health care has never been more critical. Now, according to a 2015 study, nearly 80% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facilities are located, Congressman, within walking distance of minority neighborhoods. Is there any concern on Capitol Hill about the location of these clinics and the racial connotations therein?
Well, there's no doubt there's a great deal of concern among pro-life lawmakers. Unfortunately, the pro-abortion members see this as further facilitation and promotion of abortion on demand. Let's not forget that Margaret Sanger herself was a racist and a eugenicist. I've read 3 of her books. She was very, very harsh in her views regarding people of color and people who had disabilities, so much so that she was an out-and-out racist. And you're right about that 2015 study. The number of abortions procured by women of color far outnumbers those by other ethnicities.
Congressman, in fiscal year 2020, Planned Parenthood is set to receive something like $618 million. That includes Medicaid reimbursements. Now, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have expressed support for the repeal of the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits federal funding of abortions. You were very involved in passing that amendment the first time and every consecutive time. Has it been part of any of these massive spending bills we've been seeing going out of the House?
It's a great question. Yes, the last COVID-19 relief bill had no Hyde restrictions on it whatsoever. So money is flowing to community health centers. It's flowing to governors in terms of money that they can then give to Planned Parenthood or anybody that they would like, including for abortion. And we raised strenuously that objection, but unfortunately, the Democrats in the House and Senate, and above all, the Biden administration, would hear none of it and insisted that they wanted to be able to use it to promote abortion. And that was a first major round that we lost, and it's great with great sorrow. The next step will be to try to eviscerate the Hyde Amendment and all the other abortion riders, as they're called, that protect the taxpayer from being coerced into paying for abortions. The Marist poll, as you know, Raymond, showed recently, again, almost 6 out of 10 Americans are against having their dollars used to pay for abortion. That's not even a speed bump to the Biden White House. They are insisting on this. So we will have a major fight on the next year's appropriations bills.
I want to move on to another topic this week. John Kerry, the special presidential envoy for climate, is on his way to China for talks on climate change in advance of a virtual summit that President Joe Biden is hosting next week. Now, in a recent interview with CNN, when asked about problems between the U.S. and China, Kerry had this to say.
Yes, we have big disagreements with China on some key issues, absolutely. But climate has to stand alone.
Some key issues, Congressman. China's destroying Hong Kong. The Chinese Communist Party's committed genocide against the Uyghur Muslims, persecuted people of faith. They're threatening Taiwan. Are we trading human rights and freedom rights and religious rights for climate here?
in a word, they not only are deprioritizing human rights and democracy, they are sending the message to Xi Jinping, who is running a genocide against the Muslim Uyghurs as you and I talk. And of course, what he's done to Hong Kong is horrific. And all of the human rights abuses, the repression of religious freedom, the incarceration and torture and killing of believers and democracy activists, all is going on concurrently. It needs to be integrated with any talks on any other issue, whether it be trade, climate change, or any other issue under the sun. By putting it into a separate compartment, it tells Xi Jinping the United States really doesn't care about human rights. It's a sub-issue. It's on page 15 somewhere in a list of so-called priorities. We saw that during the Obama administration. We especially saw it when Hillary Clinton was on her first trip to Beijing. She said, "I'm not going to let human rights interfere with the other agendas that they had at the time." What? Human rights is the core. Caring for men and women and children who are being horribly mistreated by the Chinese Communist Party needs to be the next sentence after everything else we talk about.
Do you foresee the Biden administration lifting the Trump trade sanctions in exchange for Chinese participation in a climate change summit or something like it?
Well, my concern is I see them lifting trade sanctions for just about any other reason. Biden and others were very much about trade and did not want to link human rights with trade. He was a defender of the coercive population control program. And then when he was called out on it, I'm one of the ones who did it on the floor of the House. He said, "Oh, no, we're not really for that." But then they want to give money to the groups like the UN Population Fund, and they want to triple their funding that have had a hand-in-glove relationship with the dictatorship in China in coercing women to have abortions and forced sterilizations. Human rights are not even on the page. A little rhetorical. They'll say something that sounds nice. CNN will broadcast it and say, "Oh, look, they mentioned human rights." Human rights has to be the core of our policy.
Mm-hmm. You are the co-chair of the Hong Kong caucus on the House side. This week, a letter by prominent Hong Kong Catholic Jimmy Lai, who has been in prison since December, was made public. In it, he writes, "Hong Kong's situation is increasingly chilling, but precisely because of that, we need to love and cherish ourselves more." He's writing this to his staff. "The era is falling apart before us, and it is time for us to stand tall and keep our heads high." Now, we've seen bipartisan support for Hong Kongers by Congress in the last couple of years. What are your colleagues thinking of this situation now and these increasing threats against Taiwan? And do you believe we need to boycott the Olympics, given the moves, the aggressive moves by Beijing?
Well, I think John Kerry, who is a very high official, should be demanding the release of Jimmy Lai and Joshua Wong and all of the other democracy activists. I'm the prime author of the House-passed Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, and we couldn't get that passed during the Obama administration. They thought it would complicate the situation. We finally got it passed during the administration of Trump, and he signed it into law. There needs to be serious sanctioning of this crushing of democracy in Hong Kong. They're breaking their commitments, treaty commitments. So if they're going to break those, why are you going to believe them on something like a climate change accord? They're not doing it.
Or intellectual rights.
Exactly, or any other kind. I mean, it just at the time of their choosing, they just abrogate the treaty or the agreement. And in terms of the Olympics, we should not, I say again, not participate, send a team, and the International Olympic Committee ought to find a new venue. When have we ever had an Olympics held in a country where its leadership is committing genocide as the Olympic torch is being carried around? I mean, there's no sense that the genocide being committed right now will dissipate or even ameliorate over the next several months or even maybe in years.
Congressman Chris Smith, I thank you for being on the program.
Thank you so much, Raymond.
Distribution of the single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been paused in the U.S. and delayed for rollout in Europe. This action came after the FDA and the CDC reported 6 known cases of a rare and severe type of blood clot linked to the J&J vaccine. On Tuesday, Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institutes for Health, had this to say.
This is a really rare event. If you look at what we know so far, there have been 6 out of the 6.85 million doses, which is less than 1 in a million. We want to get this worked out as quickly as we possibly can. And that's why you see the word pause. In other words, you want to hold off for a bit and very well may go back to that, maybe with some conditions or maybe not.
For Insight, we're joined by Dr. Stephen Smith, an infectious disease specialist, head of the Smith Center for Infectious Diseases and Urban Health in New Jersey. Dr. Smith, thanks for being here. How worrisome is the pausing of this Johnson & Johnson vaccine? A few weeks ago, we saw a similar thing with the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe.
Well, I mean, it's not very worrisome. I mean, the rate is very small. This debate would be a lot more difficult if this were the only vaccine or all the COVID vaccines cause this kind of side effect at this rate. And right now, it's less than 1 in a million. We use the polio virus vaccine in our babies for decades, and the rate of paralytic polio, giving that vaccine to those babies, was 1 in a million. And then there was another 1 in 500,000 chance that your grandfather got it or something. So we know vaccines have risks. And the question is, how much risk are we willing to accept for that vaccine in that situation? The smallpox vaccine had much higher adverse effects, much higher side effect profile than anything we'd use today. And they put up with it. No one was given informed consent back then. And we got rid of smallpox, eradicated from the earth. And so it just depends on how much risk you're willing to accept in this situation. In this situation, we have 2 vaccines that are very effective, and the third coming that don't have any signal of this. As you mentioned, AstraZeneca had similar patients, their subjects that got the vaccine in AstraZeneca in Europe and had the same clot happen. That doesn't mean they're causally linked. That just means it's another bit of evidence that the vaccine's doing it. And because we have other effective options that are safer or appear safer, there is not a huge debate right now. And that pause is going to be a very long pause, I have a feeling. Go ahead.
Is there any difference in the makeup of these vaccines that make one less prone to difficulties? And you say there are others on the horizon that could possibly have no side effects.
Well, we never say no side effects, never 0 and 100% in medicine, right?
Yeah.
So the first 2 vaccines are so-called RNA-based, and they don't even have any infection. They just kind of melt into your body. They're little bubbles of lipid fat that merge with your cells, fuse with your cells, and the RNA goes in, and then they make the spike protein, and your body makes an immune response against the spike protein. These 2, AstraZeneca and the so-called J&J vaccine, they're adenovirus-based. What does that mean? That means instead of using this lipid particle to get the genes of the virus into the cell, the gene of the spike protein into the cell, each of these viruses uses an adenovirus, which is a type of virus that can cause colds and a bunch of other types of infections. I think one of these viruses actually is an adenovirus from chimpanzees, but the virus is gutted. In any of these situations where we use so-called viral vectors, there's no live virus in the vaccine. It's just single cycle, meaning the rearranged, genetically engineered adenovirus vaccine can only infect one cell, and then it injects the same way or similar way that the mRNA vaccines do by fusing with the cell the gene for the spike protein. But the 2 that have some signal of this clot problem are both adenovirus-based, but they're different adenoviruses. So it's not clear that would make a difference or not. But there's enough there to slow down and look at it, and also say, well, we've got the 2 RNA vaccines, very effective, very safe. On the horizon, in the very soon horizon, we have the Novavax vaccine. I believe they've already filed with the FDA. They did their trials despite getting money from the US, over $1 billion. They did their trial in the UK, I believe, and they had 95% efficacy. So that's coming down. That should be approved in late May or June.
I want to get your reaction to something Dr. Fauci and the CDC have been saying. They claim that even if you're vaccinated, you have to continue to wear masks. This is White House spokesman Jen Psaki. Listen.
We believe that part of our objective is to model public health guidelines, and that means continuing to wear masks, continuing to hand wash, social distance. Hence, the president gave a primetime address where he said, when the vaccine's accessible to you and you get it, we can work towards having backyard barbecues.
Jen doesn't wear a mask during her press conferences, right?
Right.
No, you don't need a mask.
Exactly.
It's absurd. The CDC's recommendations are conflicting and hypocritical. So if you're fully vaccinated, meaning 2 weeks after the second shot for the RNA vaccines, or 2 weeks after the first shot for the J&J, that's fully vaccinated. You're not going to get infected. You're not going to spread it. The CDC says if you're fully vaccinated and you're going to a small gathering with other fully vaccinated people, no masks are needed. If you're fully vaccinated and you're visiting a house where there's people that aren't vaccinated, but they're low risk, I don't know how you're supposed to know that. I mean, doctors know that. Then you don't have to wear a mask. But in other situations, in the public, you need to wear a mask. That's absurd. The data are quite clear and stunning. There's more and more data coming every day. March 23rd issue of New England Journal of Medicine, which hasn't exactly been the most advanced anti-COVID measures magazine ever, has 3 articles from 3 different centers. One's from Israel, one's from UT Southwestern, and one is from the University of California at San Diego and UCLA. And there's a stunning reduction. This is healthcare workers that got fully vaccinated, and during that time, they swabbed their noses of asymptomatic people, and the rates plummeted, less than 0.05%, I think, in one study. I'm not a point percent, 0.17% in another study, and these are much, much lower rates than the healthcare workers that were not vaccinated or that were partially vaccinated. So the CDC can't have it both ways too. You can't say, well, you don't need masks when you're around vaccinated people, but when you're around other people, you do. Remember, the CDC's new theory about masks is that you're to protect you from protect other people around you. It doesn't protect the wearer. The CDC's own data show that. A randomized trial from the Danish study shows that. So they came with a new theory that if you're asymptomatically infected, this mask is going to decrease the number of droplets getting out in the environment and infecting those around you. But if you're fully vaccinated, the chance of you getting asymptomatically infected are extremely low. And so they know this. I have no idea why they have taken this policy, except I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah. Well, I want the audience to understand, you actually treat COVID patients regularly and have treated them since the beginning of this, unlike many of these bureaucrats who are just looking at data.
Way too regularly. I've treated, I think, I stopped counting, over 500. It is funny to hear them talk about COVID like they know what they're talking about. They don't. They don't treat patients. They're administrators. And to be a leading infectious disease doctor in the United States, one should be treating patients as an infectious disease physician, as my father did before me. And it's quite a difference to be out there in the middle of it. And again, this is a very strange virus. I have a lot of respect for it, but the vaccines are very effective. The RNA vaccines are extremely effective. And so I don't know.
And what are you seeing? You told me, you and I were talking before we came on, you're seeing something very strange with this virus in the way that it's reoccurring, or the way that the immune system is reacting to it.
There's many unique things about this virus, and I got them all wrong. So when we get infected with the virus, and we're not vaccinated before, and we get our first-time infection, our body responds. And a big part of responding to a viral infection is production of our own antibodies against the virus, natural immunity. And when your antibodies come up, so you're infected with the virus, and your antibodies rise, the virus goes down and you get better, except in COVID. It's about 60% of our patients now being admitted, this has been going on for several months, maybe the whole time, are antibody positive. And they're not vaccinated antibody positive. They're unvaccinated, infected individuals who are getting worse and continue to get worse, need to be admitted because they're low oxygen levels, and they have their own antibody already in their blood. Their noses have the virus, so the blood has the antibody, they still have the virus, they're still very sick, getting sicker, and the antibody is either not doing anything or is making them sicker. I don't know. And I've never seen that. There's no description I can think of in infectious diseases where that occurs. And so that's why I was a little worried in the beginning, and go back to May, June, about would a vaccine work? Because we knew we had antibody positive, virus positive patients back then. And you don't see that. You don't see that with hepatitis B, for instance. You see it with some very strange infections that are chronic infections, but this is not a chronic infection. This is an acute infection that can last a long time and can and does get worse in some patients as their antibodies develop. It's ridiculous.
I got to play this for you, Dr. Smith, before I let you go. This is Thursday. Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio demanded that Dr. Fauci give him a date for the end of these COVID mitigation measures. Listen.
We had 15 days to slow the spread, turned into 1 year of lost liberty. What measure, what standard, what objective outcome do we have to reach before Americans get their liberty and freedoms back?
I don't look at this as a liberty thing, Congressman Jordan.
Well, that's
I look
obvious.
At this as a public health thing.
Dr. Fauci went on, he refused to give a timeline or any statistics on what would constitute an end to these mitigation measures. What do you make of Dr. Fauci's answer, Dr. Smith?
It was evasive, of course. I mean, you know, the data are there. I mean, you can't, the New England Journal published 3 different studies showing that fully vaccinated healthcare workers don't get infected, or are very, very, very low rate of getting infected, and no evidence that those that did get infected, that 0.5%, infect anybody, right? So this is it's like they don't want it to go away, you know. And there's friends of mine too that perseverated over getting the vaccine after being fearful of COVID for the last 13 months. We want this to go away, and it's ridiculous that people are wearing masks after they're fully vaccinated. There's no point to it except that we want to be egalitarian or something weird, so the vaccinated versus the non-vaccinated people. We don't look down upon the unvaccinated people. I don't know. I think the masks are part of the problem. My observations, the surges that have occurred in Jersey in October, starting late October through December, and now in March, still going on now, late February through March, people are wearing masks. And I think there's false confidence that these masks are protecting them. We know they don't. The masks now are theorized to protect people around the mask wearer, but not the person wearing the mask. If masks worked, I'd be all for it. If throwing salt, on my head would work, I'd do that. But I think they're part of the problem, and we know that fully vaccinated people, they certainly don't need them.
We will leave it there. We could go on for an hour, but we'll check back in with you because this is fascinating. And I love the idea that you are actually a practitioner who have been dealing with hundreds and hundreds of COVID patients, unlike so many of these people who are self-declared experts who look at spreadsheets and watch CNN. This is not an expert. This is a prognosticator or a pundit. So thank you for your insight and your expertise. My next guest served as chaplain at one of the most infamous prisons in the United States, Death Row at San Quentin State Prison in California. There was a time when he, too, was in danger of going in the wrong direction in his life. Here to share his story of redemption, forgiveness, and hope is pastor, entrepreneur, and author of Death Row Chaplain, Reverend EARL SMITH. He joins us from Sacramento. EARL, thank you for being here. Before we get to your time at San Quentin, I want you to describe what it was like growing up in Stockton, California. You were very close to your father, to whom you dedicated your book. You say he was your best friend, your hero. What lessons did he teach you? And how, despite his presence and example, did you get involved in gangs and drugs at 11 years old?
Well, Raymond, thank you for having me. I think one of the real clear lessons my dad taught me was, he was my baseball coach. We played a game, we were winning, I made an error, and we lost. And so I get in the car, I could only call him coach on the field. I get in the car, and I'm crying. He says, "What's wrong?" I said, "You know what's wrong, I made an error, they hate me." And he says, "What did you do?" I said, "I made an error, you know," and I'm screaming. And he says, "Son, if it's a name for it, you're not the first one that did it." And I was a little leaguer, and he told me that, and I've never forgotten that lesson, that it's beyond you. The picture has to be always bigger than you, and that's really what he was telling me, that we'll get through this as well. And so many times the things that I've done in my life, my dad was there almost whispering in my ear, we'll get through this as well.
And by your late teens, in 1975, you are wrapped up in a gang, drugs, and you had a harrowing experience that changed your life forever. Two guys come to your door. What happened next?
Well, one of the guys owed me money. He was selling drugs for me, and he was late. I put word out I was going to find him. He brought another guy I'd never seen in my life. I was watching the World Series, love baseball, and so when they knock on the door, I just let them come in. I have them sit down until I figure out what I'm going to do. He made a sign to the guy that he brought with him that I didn't know, and the guy pulled a gun out and just started shooting me. And he shot me. Wow. He actually emptied the gun because he stood over me clicking it after it was empty, and the guy says, "Come on, he's done." After they left, unbeknownst to me, the police had me under surveillance, so they actually ran by the police car that it was on the corner having me under surveillance. I knocked on my neighbor's door and said, "I've been shot, you need to call the police." When she calls the police, they respond, they're there like in a hurry, and they come in, two of them leave, and so she says, "Where's the ambulance?" And the officer said to her, "Lady, if you want an ambulance, you call them." So she ended up having to call for an ambulance as well. And when I got to the hospital, my dad was there, and he stands next to me, and he says, "Son, this is bad, but we're going to get through this." And I thought all the things I'd done to embarrass him, but yet here he still was saying, "We're going to get through this." And he told me, he said something that really hit me. He said, "Son, you're a rebel, but you're God's rebel, and he's going to use you to his advantage."
Wow. And as all this is going on, you claim you hear a voice.
Well, I did. I mean, I did hear a voice. My dad looked at the doctor, Dr. James Morrissey, and he says, "How bad is it?" The doctor said he's not going to make it. The doctor had asked me to tell the police who was there who did it, and I laughed at him. And he says, "I don't know what's wrong with you people." He walked off. My dad says, well, he grabbed this doctor and brought him back. He says, "You do what you do best, and I'm going to go do what I do best." And my dad left to pray. I'm there on this gurney by myself, and this voice speaks to me and says, "You're not going to die. I have something for you to do." I clearly started to laugh because I had been around long enough to know that this voice was unusual, because as the voice started to speak to me, all the pain from the bullet stopped, the burning stopped, and the doctor thought I was going into shock. When he came back, I said, "If I tell you where the bullets are, will that help?" And he says, "No," but I started to point at my nose, my neck, my shoulder, where I was shot in my face, my chest, and everywhere I pointed, the bleeding stopped, the holes closed up. The doctor didn't know what was going on, but it was that voice that says, "You're not going to die, I have something for you to do." So people say, "Well, you say you heard a voice?" I'm positive I heard a voice, and the response of that voice was the pain stopped that I was in.
So you continue your education with the goal of obeying God's message to become a minister. That's how you interpreted it, right? And in 1983, at 27, you become the chaplain of San Quentin Prison, the youngest ever chaplain, Protestant chaplain, hired by the California Department of Corrections. The fact that you could have ended up in that prison like the men to whom you were then ministering, how did that realization help you do the job?
Well, I remember as a kid, we'd watch these Jimmy Cagney movies, and I'd always see the priest going in to visit his friend that was always seemingly locked up. And for me, everyone always said, okay, you're the guy that's going to get locked up, and such is going to be the priest to visit you. And yet here I was, and these were not just people, they were my friends. Some of my friends were there. Some of my friends were doing time there. And I knew there's a difference in doing something bad and being bad. And you can actually be a decent person, do something bad, and there's a result associated with the bad deed that you perform. And I looked at some of these guys that I knew, I grew up with, and I just thought, wow, somehow or another God has given me a reprieve, and he's allowing me to see what the reprieve really was about.
You know, the theologian, Cardinal Avery Dulles, who was a friend of mine, he used to say that men facing the death penalty were given a grace. It was a finite time to reconcile with God and prepare themselves for eternity, time they may not have made use of if they were out on the street. Does that ring true to your experience, Earl?
Yes, it does. I believe that when someone is condemned or someone is, in some states, if you get a life sentence, that's the same as that's being condemned because you're never going to get released. You're going to die while detained. And when I hear that, I think the reflection time that takes place, you're condemned to die, yet there's a process that you go through after you're condemned, and there's a reflection process. First, you're almost in a sense of denial that this actually happened. You're looking for an angle, and maybe there are some angles. Raymond, I've had people that were on my caseload that were innocent that are at home now. So I may have a different view of what I saw because I know that people were on death row that are at home.
Sure.
In fact, I have a guy at home. I have a transition home in Stockton, and I have a guy right now that was on my caseload on death row that's now living at my transition home.
I want to get back to the shooting and the aftermath, your personal story. You go into San Quentin as a chaplain, and you see the man who shot you, and you tell him what?
Well, when I saw him, it was the third time I'd ever seen him in my life. I saw him when he shot me. I saw him in court. I didn't testify against him. I wanted him on the street because I wanted to kill him. He ended up confessing, and so they gave him time, and they sort of moved him around, hiding him. And now I'm going by giving Christmas cards out, and I see this guy. And I realize, Raymond, that the forgiveness is a great word. Yet, until you encounter the thing that's caused you pain, or come to sync with the fact that there's pain associated with a deed, you don't really know what forgiveness is like. And when I saw him, I realized I didn't forgive him at that immediate moment. And so I kept giving these Christmas cards out to the guys. I'm crying, going down to tear. And they said, hey, something's wrong with Smitty. And when I got back to him, I stood in front of his cell and I said, hey, I need to say something to you. I need to thank you because God used you to get to me. And I realized it was a terrible thing that happened to me, yet it was the best thing that happened to me. So there are times in life when things happen and you're wondering what will the road look like ahead after they happen. But there's a God involved in all of our lives. And that God that was involved in my life saw the road ahead from the time I was shot. 8 years later is when I entered San Quentin.
Now you're also chaplain now to the San Francisco 49ers, the Golden State Warriors. How does that San Quentin experience translate into that ministry? Is it different?
In some cases, yes, of course, because you're dealing with a lot of people that have means. Yet the similarities are the major states and the major counties that are feeder counties for prison systems across the country are also the major states and the counties that are feeder systems for professional sports. So you have guys that may be in prison that have probably played ball alongside of the men that are on the court or on the field. And so there are similarities, and so you find that guys, what was the difference is usually the thing that I say. What was a separating point that allowed one man to end up in this spot and another to end up in this spot? And in many cases, it was mentors. It was the people that poured into their lives.
Critical. It's critical. That's why your ministry is so important. I want to share a passage from Death Row Chaplain. You write, "Men whom society has cast aside due to their crimes must come to realize they are not their crimes, and then decide if it is worth it to move forward with their lives. In prison, hope has a conversation with reality, and hope polishes the rough spots of reality with faith, which says, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creation. Behold, old things are passed away, all things become new." Give me a sense of how society at large misunderstands prison and the imprisoned. What do we need to know?
Well, first of all, when we say that they're incarcerated, and I try to tell people everywhere I go that incarceration takes place before detention. You're incarcerated, and a byproduct of your incarceration may end up being detention. Prison is your place of detention. So when you find people that went to prison and they were detained and they got out, and there's this word called recidivism, nothing's changed. Well, for me, what I say is, if I can attack your incarceration while you're detained, whenever you're released, you will be released changed. And when you think about rehabilitation, what are you going to return back to? It means to change oneself back to one's former self. And I think the word should be regeneration. We're looking for regeneration. So for me, I've never seen a birth certificate that the name said rapist, murderer, thief, dope fiend. There was actually a name on it. So when guys come to me and they have all these street names, I said, what's your government name? What's the name on your birth certificate? Because that's the name I'm looking for. That's the way we're going to get started with this conversation.
No, it's recognizing the personhood and rediscovering that person buried under everything else. In the book, you also write, I've relied upon a saying that has biblical significance. The law is for the lawless. A prison has to exist for certain people. Some are lawless to their core, and even if given an opportunity to change into law-abiding citizens, they would turn down the offer. Related to this, I want your take in the ongoing calls to defund the police, dismantle or rethink law enforcement agencies, particularly in what we're seeing across the country today. Your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things I would say is, whenever your mom is hurt or someone breaks into your mother's house, you want your mom to call the police. So there's a notion that we want to say get rid of the police. If something I know people that have called the police that we thought were really gangster type guys, and so there's a need for it. The thing that I would say is, there's also a need to understand the communities better. So many of the police departments in this country have employees that don't live in the communities where the police in the cities where they work. So they come to work, they leave. So when we're saying, how do we address the police department? The thing I would say is more community policing, more people from the communities being on the force that would have a better understanding and relationship with the residents in the community.
Before I let you go, I want to talk about recidivism. We brought it up earlier. How do you teach your men, the men you mentor and minister to live on the outside? What skills did you try to impart to them so they could return to society and not return to prison?
Well, I like to use acronyms. So the first one that I really start working with the guys on is AIR, accountability, integrity, responsibility. And I got that from flying from Northern California to Southern California. When the air in Northern California was clear as I was landing in LA at LAX. It was dirty. It was a smog alert. And I realized that a lot of people get used to breathing toxic, dirty air. And so for me, how can I get a guy that maybe has conditioned himself to survive on toxic air to understand clean air is really what you need? And so that comes with accountability, that comes with integrity, that comes with a sense of responsibility. And then we go to the CDCR, choices, decisions, consequences, responsibilities. Everything you do is associated with something else. And so as we sit around us and we start to teach these, and we wrote a lot of different curriculum that we teach in prisons, and as we teach it, we're basically trying to get guys to understand and model. And here's one of the things I'll say, Raymond. I ask a guy this: if we had welcome to the prison day for your children, and they would walk around with you all day on the condition that you didn't change anything you did, would you want your children to be there to see what you did that day? And if you can't say yes to that, then it's time to address what you're doing.
I wish we had more time. Earl Smith, thank you so much for being here. And you can keep up with Earl's work at chaplainearlsmithministries.com. Earl's memoir, Death Row Chaplain, Unbelievable True Stories from America's Most Notorious Prison, is available at bookstores everywhere. And a film adaptation is in the work, I hear. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Yes.
Earl Smith, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raymond. I appreciate it.
My next guest says Western civilization is under threat, but is there anything we can do to change course and preserve the culture? Joining me now to shed light on these questions and much more is Professor of Philosophy at Boston College, author of the aptly titled new book, How to Destroy Western Civilization and Other Ideas from the Cultural Abyss, Dr. Peter KREEFT. Thanks for being with us. I want to begin with the first line from the book. You write, "The single most necessary thing we can possibly do to save civilization at all times, in all places, and in all cultures, whether they are good or evil, religious or irreligious, ancient or modern, is to have children." Dr. KREEFT, is that enough? And what does it say about a culture that has children but doesn't care for them or raise them in a loving family?
Necessary but not sufficient. If you don't have children, you don't have the bricks that a civilization is made of. Once you have children, you have to have good ones. So the first question is, do the children exist? And the second question is, what's their nature? And we're having fewer and fewer children, and we're also caring for them less and less in important moral and religious ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're also seeing birth rates fall in the United States and Europe. The number of babies the average woman in the U.S. is expected to deliver has dropped from nearly 4 in the 1950s to fewer than 2 today. The same is true for every member nation of the European Union. What does that tell us about the direction of this civilization?
I would use the 2-word term collective suicide in answer to that question. If you don't have children, your family is going to eventually disappear. Europe is in process of becoming a Muslim continent. The Muslims tried to conquer Europe by the force of arms a number of times. They always failed, and now they're doing it by a much more powerful force, namely mothers, and they're succeeding.
You write about a clash that is defining so many of the political debates before us. You write, religious liberty threatens sexual liberty. Our religious freedom of conscience threatens their sexual freedom of conscience. It's not their behavior that we threaten, it's their conscience. They want us to approve their behavior, at least implicitly, by paying for it. How does religious liberty win out here when increasingly less people believe, Dr. KREEFT, or practice a defined faith, and the families are broken?
Liberty makes no sense unless you have a morally ordered universe. Simple liberty to do anything is like being in a desert with no roads and you're free to move in any direction at all. It makes no difference which direction you move in. And the denial of what C.S. Lewis called the Tao, the moral law, the moral order that every culture and civilization in the history of the world has believed, the decay and eventual disappearance of that means that the word liberty will be meaningless.
Mm-hmm. No, I was struck when I read the book. You diagnose the various cracks in the dam here of this Western civilization. And a big part of that is faith, naturally, and the diminishment of faith in the public sphere. A recent Gallup poll showed that fewer than half of U.S. adults say they belong to a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. Religious membership, as I know you're aware, in the U.S. has fallen just to 47% among those surveyed. Now, you write that a conversion of culture requires conversion of individuals. Yet you also point out that the Catholics, Muslim, Orthodox Jews, evangelicals, that are the only groups left in the West, they're the only ones upholding traditional morality. Can there be conversions of individuals and therefore a culture if the people are leaving their faith?
Yes. History shows a kind of moral graph that looks like a roller coaster. There have been conversions. There have been cultural conversions. Cultures have come back. We're not doomed. A prophet is not someone who predicts the future, but warns against one path, thereby implying that another path is always possible. For instance, under good King Josiah, Jewish culture through the Jewish religion was significantly revived. This can happen again. It all depends on how many individuals convert and how deeply they convert. So the first and most important thing we can do for civilization interiorly is a relationship to God, and exteriorly it is to produce good children.
So you see this almost as a natural ebb and flow of a culture's moral life, and that you need to hit rock bottom to be reborn? Is that part of your thesis here?
No, I think that's too deterministic. Sometimes you hit bottom and then reform. Sometimes you reform before you hit bottom. I love Gandhi's answer to the question, what do you think about Western civilization? And he said, I think it would have been a good idea.
Yeah, me too. As I read your book, what we're seeing unfold in Germany really resonates. The church there has moved forward with this program of reform. They call it reform. It's called the Synodal Path, which questions the established teaching on faith and morals of the church. The release last month of the fundamental text, this is the document guiding their deliberations, states, there is no one truth of the religious, moral, and political world, and no one form of thought that can lay claim to ultimate authority. Your thoughts on this, Dr. KREEFT, and is this a domino of Western civilization falling in Europe here?
It's the first domino, and it's the fundamental heresy. The very essence of Christianity, which goes back to the very first creed in Christian history, three-word formula that is repeated twice in St. Paul's epistles, namely, Jesus is Lord, Kyrios, the word never used for Caesar or any other human lord. The German church is repudiating that, or at least repudiating the fact that Jesus claimed to be that. If there is no such thing as the way and the truth and the life, then Jesus is a fool.
What should the Vatican be doing about this situation? If you were advising the Pope, what would you suggest he do?
Find another Mother Teresa and take lessons from her. Saints save the world. They are the dynamos of spiritual energy that you can't refute, you can't answer. No one ever defeated Mother Teresa in an argument.
In a chapter entitled 12 Core Values in your book, you write that most people no longer know the value of values, the virtue of virtues. You go on to give an example of a martyr killed at the time of the Roman Empire who wrote as he was dying, "Credo in unum Deum," or "I believe in one God." And you say, what's the difference between then and now? Then every Christian knew one salient fact about Christianity, that it is either everything or nothing, either the world's stupidest lie or the world's ultimate truth. That if Jesus Christ is not literally everything to you, then he's nothing at all. Now, almost no one knows that anymore, and those who do, and say so, are labeled fanatics, you write. Peter, how do you reclaim that understanding and spread it in this culture?
You can't spread it unless you have it, and you can't have it unless you get it, and you can't get it unless you want it. So you first have to want it. You have to meet Jesus Christ and say, "You are my Lord. You are not simply my friend, my chum, my psychiatrist. You are more than that. You are my God." You have to say what Doubting Thomas said, "My Lord and my God."
Mm-hmm. Well, you also need, as you said earlier, you need saints to be the billboards for this so that people are drawn to the truth that's animating these lives. And that's what we're in great need of today, perhaps, more than anything else.
Yeah, there's two levels, the intellect and the will. Intellectually, you have to be what our enemies call fanatic in order to justify your moral fanaticism. To say to God, "Your will be done," without qualification, to ask him to fill in the amount and to write him a blank check. That's the moral key. That presupposes the intellectual key. That presupposes that if Jesus is not what he claims to be, he's the world's biggest fool and liar and egotist. Either all or nothing.
In How to Destroy Western Civilization, you write, the 4 happiest, most prosperous, peaceful, and stable societies in history had 2 salient characteristics. They were very moralistic, we would call them preachy, and they had a very high view of the family. They are the Mosaic, the Confucian, the Islamic, and the Roman. What's the lesson there, Peter, and how do we save Western civilization?
The lesson is very obvious. History shows that a primary key, if not the primary key, to the secular success of a civilization is this dimension of piety, of respect for religion and morality. There are a few people always who seem to be moral nonconformists, who seem to live a successful life. They're always the minority. And there are always some philosophers who attain a moral clarity without religion, but they're always the minority. By far, the strongest support for morality is religion, and the strongest support for society is morality. Therefore, without those two supports, society has always collapsed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We will leave it there. It's a fantastic read, How to Destroy Western Civilization and Other Ideas from the Cultural Abyss by Peter KREEFT. It's available now at bookstores everywhere, online, including the EWTN catalog. Peter KREEFT, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. God bless your work.
The World Over is now available as a podcast. Download us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Take us wherever you go. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for joining us. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.